About 9 years ago, long before I had heard much of anything about the Noosphere, I first sketched a diagram like this. Can you make that for me, Philip? It was my attempt to map the cosmic structure of relationality, synchronic, diachronic, human, animal, ecological, and spiritual, underlying the worldview of Louise Erdrich's fiction. Time, manifest as plot in a narrative mode, seemed something like an elongated spiral or coil, with patterns of recognition, of repetition, of return, but also change, innovation, expansion, and energy. Space and place in her work are zones of remembrance and return, and also of origin, loss, reclamation, and transformation. In moving through space and time, her fictional characters also both find and make moves that reveal their connections to other times, places. The cyclical nature of their journeys enables them to hop forward and back in ways that disrupt linear, unidirectional notions of time and singular or impenetrable notions of place. They weave and walk between zones in ways that reveal the endless, ultimate connectedness of all being and reality. Today, as I return to Erdrich's work after 8 years in all-consuming academic administration, I find powerful resonances with the Noosphere, points of connection and challenge I'm only just beginning to trace. So please be gentle with me as this is new thought I am just growing into. Today, I want to look at the ways that Erdrich's second memoir, a literary travel narrative called Books and Islands in Ojibwe Country, theorize books, symbolic and artistic communication, as means for unlocking such connection and enabling such traversal. The travel memoir traces Erdrich's dual pilgrimage to sites of cultural treasures that speak of her mixed blood heritage. Published in 2003 by the National Geographic Society initially, the memoir maps a literal path from books to islands to an island of books. Departing from her home in Minneapolis, where she owns a bookstore, and traveling to Lake of the Woods along the Minnesota, Ontario, US-Canada border, the land-loving pilgrim steps out of her comfort zone and wades into a transformational experience in the water, islands, and culture of her northern Ojibwe relatives, both ancient and new. The climax of this part of her journey is her encounter with the traditional Ojibwe rock paintings in Lake of the Woods. These century-old pictographs, which both record and enact the religious sensibility of their Indigenous artists, are like books, not yet, sorry. I'll signal like this. Thank you. Are like books, concludes the writer, who expresses an immediate and intense and intimate sense of connection with her ancient relatives. This connection, which is bound up in shared landscape, language, and spiritual practices, is a major focus of the chapters that Erdrich devotes to her time in the region. The second leg of her journey takes her 100 miles or so more east to Rainy Lake and to the private island library of the late explorer and friend to the Ojibwe, Ernest Oberholzer. Having previously visited the small island, Erdrich finds herself again staying in the library, a renovated tool shed at water's edge where a large part of the vast collection is stored. Upon this second visit, she becomes briefly obsessed in her effort to find a rare first edition of Tristram Shandy that had come to hold special meaning for her. The early novel remains hidden among its many uncatalogued fellows, but Erdrich's failed quest is revelatory in other ways, confirming her sense that, like rock paintings, books, or at least some kinds or examples of books, are sacred. Neither pictographs nor novels are sacred objects for Erdrich as commonly understood, though. They don't, that is, hold power in and of themselves, nor are they simply imbued with power by a divine source. Rather, books, in Erdrich's broad sense of the term, carry the power of articulation, understood in both its expressive and connective senses. Their spiritual power, according to Erdrich's mixed blood theology, lies in their ability to transport both creator, writer or artist, and receiver, reader or viewer, across time, space, and culture to a point of mutual meeting. They are vehicles for not only for transcendence, as in roughly rising above one's immediate or material constraints, but also for traversal, enabling both parties to cross boundaries and come together in or through them such that distinct times and places are experienced together, intermingled. Books also defy easy classification as sacred objects because they are, for Erdrich, ultimately more like sacred beings or presences than like objects at all. They are, in fact, spirits who haunt, remain, hide in, or traverse our world, inviting us to step into other spheres of knowing and ways of being. Establishing a primary juxtaposition between books and islands in her title and early chapters, Erdrich brings an Indigenous sensibility to her reflection upon the links between narrative and place. Unsettling any easy distinction between culture and nature, she considers the ways that language, religion, and history both reflect and shape a people's relationship to particular landscapes. But Erdrich soon complicates the preliminary pairing of culture and nature by comparing two kinds of aesthetic objects, books and rock paintings, as living, enduring forces in their respective cultural and religious traditions. Erdrich's understanding of the book is informed by her understandings of both Western and Christian tradition that prioritize the divine word, the canonical book, and also by her Anishinaabe culture, or Ojibwe, which understands all of creation as sacred, appreciates the power of the living breath infusing speech, and attends always to the relationship's grounding linguistic acts. For Erdrich, books, in the broad sense in which she uses the term, are living. All such books are potentially sacred texts. They are an inheritance to be treasured and preserved, and also ghosts, spirits, and dream guides, voices and visions demanding a response. Why books? Erdrich asks repeatedly in her text, alluding simultaneously to the title of her memoir, the destination of her journey quest, and the center of her life's work. One answer: so we can talk to you even though we are dead. Books are the means by which writers and readers become present to each other across time, distance, and death. They are a site of communion and a point of intersection from which to traverse the multiple planes of existence that span both time and place. As sacred texts of a sort, books are both records of and invitations to spiritual experience. Erdrich's notion defies the sacred profane opposition that underlies Western traditional notions of the sacred text, as outlined by Eliade, for instance. Books are sacred because everything is. And that sacrality issues from the life that instills and holds all things together, what Paula Gunn Allen calls the sacred hoop of being. Next slide, please. But books also play a special role in enabling transversal across and through, across, and around this webbed hoop, or coil, as I've come to see it in Erdrich's oeuvre. My discussion today aims to contextualize what I've elsewhere called her sacralization of the book by showing how it stems from a larger Indigenous vision of a cosmic relationality, a vision that speaks to feminist religious impulses across lines of racial, cultural, geographical, and political difference, and that I'm coming to think brings an important perspective to bear on the noosphere, and also by suggesting how it is informed by Erdrich's most intimate and literal relations, that is, by her experience as mother to the infant whom she totes along on her spiritual journey to Lake of the Woods. Erdrich is both a reader and writer of sacred texts, and there is a reciprocity of reading and writing, hearing and telling, reception and return. In her memoir, we see the artist enter into the web of her own work, relating passionately, tentatively, paradoxically, to the same sorts of intimate and cosmic realities with which her fictional characters' lives are entwined in the matrix of novels that she has written. Like a spider, the multi-genre writer spins a world out of her own stuff and then walks across and through it, relating responsively to the made and the found, the created and the caught, including her readers. As a creator, the author is both like the biblical God who speaks the universe into being out of nothing and later condescends to become a part of it, and also like the Indigenous spider woman who spins creation and relation out of her imagination, extending from and in continuity with what is in a state of perpetual and collaborative remaking. As Muskogee poet Joy Harjo writes, "We gather at the shore of all knowledge, as peoples who were put here by a God who wanted relatives. This God was lonely for touch and imagined herself as a woman, with children to suckle, to sing with, to continue the web of the terrifyingly beautiful cosmos of her womb. This God became a father who wished for others to walk beside him in the belly of creation." Next slide. In The Sacred Hoop, Polygon, I think you got ahead of me, so back one, yeah. In The Sacred Hoop, Polygon Allen emphasizes the connection between Old Spider Woman, the web of creation, and the work of storytelling. "In the beginning was thought," Allen begins her first chapter, "and her name was woman." She continues, "The mother, the grandmother, is recognized from earliest times to the present among those peoples of the Americas who kept to the eldest traditions. She is the old woman spider, who weaves us together in a fabric of interconnection. She is the eldest God, the one who remembers and remembers, and through the history of the past 500 years has taught us bitterness and helpless rage. We endure into the present, alive, certain of our significance, certain of her centrality, her identity as the sacred hoop of being." Known among the Keres Pueblo people as Old Spider, Grandmother Spider, or Spider Woman, her name can also be translated as Thought Woman, or Creating Through Thinking Woman. She is the dreamer, the ritual center who sang the sister goddesses into life, and then taught them all to sing creation into being. A creatrix who breathes life into the first people, she's more complex and powerful than a fertility goddess, and she is, in Allen's telling, the quintessential spirit. In her manifestation as the goddess Ixtal of the Yucatan, her power to weave includes the power to unravel, and she is imbued with disruptive and transformative qualities as well as creative ones. While Allen appears to be drawing primarily on ancient Indigenous traditions from more southern regions than those inhabited by Erdrich's Anishinaabe, Grandmother Spider has, with some aid from Allen's very influential work, found her way into Indigenous cultural expressions across tribal lines. As a pan-Indian emblem, Spider Woman informs Erdrich's work in important ways. Allen highlights the essential connection for us when she explains that, quote, "the seamless web of human life and non-human life is simultaneously the oral tradition and the thought of Old Spider Woman," end quote. Allen makes this point in elaborating how it is that a number of mixed-blood characters in American Indian novels find their way from Western experience and education back into what she calls the ritual patterns of their peoples. Storytelling offers the most accessible point of entry into ritual tradition for such characters, and so serves as the medium by which they are reoriented and reintegrated into the web of tribal and cosmic relation. Entry into the narrative tradition, Allen clarifies, enables individuals to realize that the significance of their own lives stems in large part from their interlocking connections with the lives of all others who share a particular psychospiritual tradition, end quote. Erdrich employs story in its oral, pictorial, and textual forms in just this way. And her autobiographical self, like her fictional characters, is both a receiver and teller of relational stories. I remember in revisiting this work, as I remembered in revisiting this work for this conference. Yes, of course, Grandmother Spider is Thought Woman. She is weaving the noosphere, and we are weaving it with her. This figure and tradition deserve our acknowledgement, respect, and awe. And Thought Woman requires of us that we not look away from history, including our own complicated, interconnected, and violent histories, as we work to create a shared human future. In Books and Islands in Ojibwe country, Erdrich explores the power of language and story to enable survival and sustain relation in the face of genocide and its related losses. In her journey, the memoirist seeks to apprehend the spiritual powers that sustain her own identity in relation. The book's an effort to uncover and to integrate all of Erdrich's own relations, as found in Books and in Islands, in the context of Ojibwe country. The book is both a quest narrative and the oft-remarked homing plot of American Indian fiction, tracing as it does a return to origins previously unknown. Louise's venture from her home in Minneapolis, where she lives with her 4 daughters, 3 teenagers from her previous marriage and a toddler from a newer relationship, is very carefully planned. She sets out to visit some of the thousands of islands that dot Lake of the Woods and to read some of the thousands of books that fill one tiny island. Her journey is driven by desire. She is longing to read both the books and the islands. But it is also carefully laid out and focused on a particular nexus. Her travels have become so focused, she writes, on books and islands that the two have merged. She explains, "I'm 48 years old and I can't travel aimlessly. I have always seemed to have a question I would like to answer. Increasingly, too, it is the same question. It is the question that has defined my life, the question that has saved my life, and the question that has most recently resulted in the questionable enterprise of starting a bookstore. The question is, books, why?" The quest is thus lifelong and life-defining, but the geography of the lake region lends parameters to this particular investigation. Attention to particular places and their histories, both geographical sites and social locations, I am arguing, should be part of our noospheric project as well. Louise points to the ways her own social location and experience as a woman and mother shapes this journey. She is not traveling alone, she explains, but is accompanied by her 18-month-old and still nursing daughter. Baby Kizikok, as she is called, serves as a constraint on Louise's freedom in what is, and these are sketches by Erdrich in the text of the memoir. Baby Kizikok serves as a constraint on Louise's freedom in what is, like her struggle to learn the Ojibwe language, also a part of her quest, an otherwise somewhat quixotic enterprise. But the baby is also a companion whose presence brings both comfort and urgency to the quest. Sometimes I look at men, at the way most of them move freely in the world without a baby attached, Louise relates, and it seems to me very strange. Sometimes it is enviable. Her packing list for the trip includes, for example, 124 disposable diapers and one of those baby harnesses for keeping toddlers from wandering off. These objects, packed along with the books and notebooks that represent her work as a researcher and writer, suggest the additional time and mental energy required to parent infants and young children. It is a double duty or second shift at which she is well practiced. But she also recalls past research trips with her playful, shrieking preteen girls and their friends, and she wonders, "I don't really know how I've ever accomplished anything, ever." And she's an incredibly prolific writer. The writer's quest is thus not solely defined by the question of books itself, but also by the relations that both frame and interpolate it. Just as her family home is literally furnished, decorated, and overflowing with books, so her research trip is built around the baby's presence and paraphernalia. The child is also, though, a comfort to her mother, who finds it painful to leave home, the dwelling of 4 essential beings, my daughters. So although the autonomy she attributes to men is occasionally enviable, she asserts that mostly it is not. Elaborating, "At night, as she curls up or sprawls next to me and I fall asleep, I hold on to her foot. This is as much for my comfort as to make sure that she doesn't fall off the bed. As I'm drifting away, I feel sorry for anyone else who is not falling asleep in this way, holding on to her baby's foot. The world is calm and clear. I wish for nothing. I am not nervous about the future. Her toe curls around my finger. I could even stop writing books." The child's need is thus mirrored in the mother's own, rendering the relationship mutually satisfying. Neither will fall, we might conclude, but both can drift away into their private psychic zones of sleep and dream with the security that they remain physically harnessed. The maternal feminine sense of contentment articulated here might seem to suggest stasis, with a mother and child appearing as a perfectly symbiotic, even hermetic pair. But this state of satisfaction contains a dynamic relation, hinted at by the variable posture of the child, and a tenuous balance, with her mother's hold on the child betraying a sort of nervousness that she denies. It also takes place in multiple borrowed beds on the road, a fact that lends movement and changeability to the scene. And while Louise claims she could stop writing books thanks to this relationship, Erdrich, in fact, maintains her prolific level of literary production and simply writes her daughter into the book. We might also speculate that Louise's quest is in part inspired by her love for her daughter, whose father, Tabasanaquit, is a traditional full-blood Ojibwe healer and sun dancer, as well as a tribal politician, teacher, and negotiator from Lake of the Woods. The girl's full first name, Nindinawemaganidok, or Sky Woman, is passed down from her maternal grandmother, who came from the lake region and who was in turn named for the spirit woman who looks after the waters in the sky. The baby's also named for Louise's mother, Rita, and they visit her Gorno Erdrich relatives in the Turtle Mountains often. Louise seemed concerned that the child also come to know her relations in and her relation to the Lake of the Woods region, which represents the other half of her heritage. Naming her daughter for one of the 4 spirit women who take care of all the waters of the world suggests a commitment on Louise's part to raise Kizikok in thoughtful relation to her watery sources, as well as a recognition that this requires stepping out of the mother's own comfort zone. I'm a dry land for hundreds of miles person, she confesses, but I've gotten mixed up with people who live on lakes. The dynamic is reinforced in the section of the memoir that addresses the author's study of the Ojibwe language. Ojibwe-Moan was the mother tongue of Louise's ancestors, but her maternal grandfather was the last member of her family to speak it fluently. I will say, apparently my prescription is in, I will say that her daughters are becoming fluent speakers of Ojibwe-Moan. The author was not raised speaking the language herself, and having taken up serious study of it only in midlife, and knowing that she will never have the facility to really use its flexible descriptive power, she wonders, how do I go back to a language I never had? It cannot be to her what it was to her ancestors, but she resists romanticizing it as something ancient and precious, but irretrievably lost. She feels as though all along this language was waiting for her with kindness, and she loves it. She is both a master and lover of her first language, English, and yet this represents only part of her bicultural identity, whereas she associates English with her Catholic training, which touched her intellectually and symbolically, but apparently never engaged her heart. In Ojibwe-Moan, she finds the manifestation of the Great Spirit or Great Mystery, Gizimanadu, the ineffable and compassionate spirit residing in all that lives. Louise has, in short, a living and spiritual relationship with the Ojibwe language. And through this relationship, she helps to sustain both its life and her own. She also insists that the language is living in the sense that it remains responsive and adaptive, not ossified and not an elevated language of vanished spirituality. To engage in the language is to engage in the spirit of the words, which is surely a delicate matter, but the language and its fluent speakers are also strong and generous enough to accommodate the, ironically, non-native speaker. And Louise's imperfect attempts are welcomed as crucial contributions to language preservation. She enters this sacred task as a novice in multiple senses, for learning Ojibwe-Moan is a lifetime pursuit that might be described as living a religion. Through language as religion, one comes to know the sacred relations that constitute reality for the Anishinaabe. Louise comments at length about the language, demonstrating how its particularities of grammar and vocabulary reflect the Anishinaabe worldview and landscape. One testimony to her people's relationship to land and place is to be found in the ancient Ojibwe rock paintings on the islands of Lake of the Woods. These call to Louise, who recognizes them as essentially alive and still relevant as teachers and dream guides to the contemporary descendants of their Anishinaabe creators. When she eventually stands before the painted figure of a horned man holding a cross, probably a reflection of the creator's status in the 4th and highest level of the Mide, or Grand Medicine Lodge, not a Christian cross at all, and tries to read it like a book, She imagines it to be a self-portrait of the artist, a graphic correlative, we might conclude, to the memoir she herself is writing. She finds transcendence in the experience, imaginatively communing with a predecessor, an Ojibwe artist from ages past, still spiritually present in his work. She also finds him specifically present to her, perceiving the artist as both kin culturally and temperamentally, sharing her own desire to speak to others, to readers, from beyond distance and death. The arts then are a means for traversing this web of existence. I use the term traversal, which I borrow from the name of of a semi-autobiographical character, Faye Travers, in her novel The Painted Drum, as a feminist alternative to transcendence. Whereas transcendence might suggest disengagement from the particulars of one's life and context, or escape from them, a rising above, traversal, as I am using it, is a more Erdrichian concept, I think, in keeping with an Indigenous understanding of inescapable and endless relationality. And I'm wondering how this concept might inform our understanding of Teilhard's omega as wholeness and overflow, as it was so helpfully limned by Ilya Delio yesterday. Books, why? Louise asks herself, so we can talk to you even though we are dead. Here we are, the writer and I, regarding each other. Most obviously, the writer here is the ancient Ojibwe artist, the creator of the Horned Man pictograph, and the work of art, which is both the painting itself and the artist's regard in the world and to the future, also are the reader's activity and response and engagement with it. This is a process and a site of mutual relations. Books live in their reading. They are intersubjective activities. Novels, like ancient pictographs, are also dream guides, and Louise relates feeling a similar sense of urgent spiritual connection to some of the books she encounters in the Oberholzer Library. So I'm going to skip over some here and just mention that she talks about reading another book on the journey, and it's W.B. Sebald's Austerlitz, about an orphan who discovers that his parents were Jewish and gave him up to enable him to escape the Holocaust, and that they were both killed. And he did not know any of this until he became an adult. She says the book speaks to her and she shares with the author a vision of the vanished people walking, recalling drowned settlements on Lake of the Woods in his description of a submerged village in Wales. She too feels the drowned faces of the past, calmly looking up through water from their ordinary task, which they have carried on below for thousands of years. If indeed the books we bring to strange places become guides and prevailing metaphors, catch-alls and lenses for new experiences, as she claims, then Austerlitz's slow journey into memory and his origins and losses is a spirit guide for her quest. Through the book, she traverses the layers of reality identified by her trickster elder Nanapush in the epigram to her 2001 novel, Last Report on the Miracles at Little No Horse. Nindinawemaganidok. There are 4 layers above the earth and 4 layers below. Sometimes in our dreams and creations, we pass through the layers, which are also space and time. In saying the word nindinawemaganidok, or my relatives, we speak of everything that has existed in time, the known and the unknown, the unseen, the obvious, all that lived before or is living now in the worlds above and below. This then is a glimpse into my current imaginative landscape as I think about time, space, and relationality in the Noosphere. So these are the images that are playing in my mind, and I'm very much struck as I keep seeing images of the Big Bang and time, cosmic time, in relation to this image. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Do you have a question for Sheila?
I have a question for Sheila.
Okay.
Do you think, I'm wondering if your talk about Erdrich's work
Yes.
is really a model for much of what story, verse, narrative do toward forwarding the Noosphere.
Yes. Next question. I'm very conscious that all of the super strict instructions I gave our moderators for keeping on time are now like biting me.
Listening.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, so,
I agree. Let's talk more.
I just want to, if it's okay, so I'll use my power of moderation and ask a question myself. Is it okay? Or
She had maybe.
It might be short. I just was interested, Sheila, in the embodied feeling of the book that Louise Erdrich has, and also the embodied feeling of the book with the land itself.
Yes.
And then its relationship to the noosphere. So is there, in your mind, a difference between the sense of these books, which are heavy embodied objects, and like an e-book or an electronic book?
She certainly loved, Erdrich really loves the physical book. And she talks about actually looking for this first edition of Tristram Shandy with, like she literally says, my precious, there's this quest. So, and her house is, built of books essentially. She has an image of an island made out of books, one of her sketches. So yeah, there is I think a tension there. And I will say, I'm a literature professor. I teach books and I have come to love the audiobook. But for very different kinds of reasons than I love the print and physical book. And I love to have all the editions of the print and physical book. And I think that, books are obviously a component of the noosphere. And the fact that they exist in multiple forms, and that the print book is not the same as the audiobook or the digital book, or another edition of the book, that they are all relatives, some closer relatives, some farther relatives, if we think of them as being spirits and guides. Yeah.
I love that the books that she is following open up new possibilities in relationship with the landscape itself.
Yeah.
So to me, that there's a connection between the noosphere and the body of the land.
Yeah, I'll show you the image. I have the book in my bag of the relationship between books and landscape. It's kind of cool, yeah.
So, session ended, so...
I want to hear your question. What's your question?
Your question.
Oh.
My question was actually about my question was for Sheila about the female qualities of basically that you spoke about in this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering how you see this transition toward, because Teilhard was a man, obviously, giving this vision of
He was. I missed that. Yeah.
So
yeah.
If there was kind of like a female quality or
Right.
kind of connection to that feminine side,
Yeah.
what kind of basically narrative we need to cultivate to have that kind of?
Well, I think this is one of the things that I am finding my way into Teilhard, right? Like I'm not a Teilhard expert like so many folks here. My sense in coming to Teilhard was, this is too teleological, right? Like I listened to this, all the stuff I was taught in my women's studies PhD, about the feminine. But as I'm thinking about for me, actually, the coil is a really helpful image because of the way that it allows for repetition and return and cyclality, I'm just making up words now, and movement through and across time that is not stasis. So I'm trying to find ways for thinking about those two things in relation. And and it's honestly, frankly, tied to my, how do we make sure that as we move forward with this project of human energy in the noosphere, that it is inclusive of the perspective of women and BIPOC people and indigenous traditions and all of that. And we're gonna maybe have to change how we read Teilhard because of that. And I certainly don't have, but a fraction of answers for beginning to think about that. But I want to put those questions on the table, and I'm so happy there are so many people from all kinds of backgrounds and perspectives at this conference.
Perfect, thank you. So thank you very much, everyone, for your presence.
Thank you.